Is Monday, January 12th, 2026. This is the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Tanya, can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Okay. We are now at the section of our meeting where there is an opportunity for citizens to speak. Because there are 6 speakers or less, speakers will be notified at 3 minutes, followed by allowed up to 5 minutes to complete their comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board or committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in a respectful and productive way and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phone. Our speaker tonight is Paul Reese.
Good evening. Hopefully I'll set a record here for the shortest speech ever, at least for me. And that is, hopefully tonight we're going to talk about some open enrollment. And I was wondering if we could get some clarification, since there seems to be some confusion out there, on how it's funded, or what monies follow a kid into the districts. And when we lose a kid to open enrollment, how much leaves and how much stays? Because it seems to be a point of confusion that people think it's dollar for dollar, that every dollar that when someone open enrolls out leaves the district, or when someone open enrolls in, every dollar that is sent for that kid comes into the district. And I think some districts have it different. I think Milwaukee might be able to keep a little bit more of the money. But if I remember right, this was done because the only way that they could get Milwaukee to go along with it was so that not all the money would leave, that they could keep, that a district keeps more of the money that is doled to it, at least the tax levy portion. So if we get clarification on that, that would be great, just for some people like me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Moving into our action items for this evening, the first action item is the approval of minutes. Are there any questions or discussion? Mrs. Voigt.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mrs. Voigt, seconded by Mr. Harland. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. The next action item for this evening is the approval of the vouchers. Did we have any questions, Mr. Clark?
No specific. The only question I got was related to the debt that we'll talk about in a little bit, but no specific voucher questions were received.
In saying that, are there any comments or questions on the vouchers this evening from the committee? If not, I'd be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Wad, seconded by Dr. Piasek. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Moving into the discussion and information items for the evening, the first topic for this night is the long-range budget projections. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, every January, according to our budget building calendar, we do go through this process of developing a multi-year projection. And in terms of looking at the 26-27 school year, we also have the benefit, it's the second year of the state biennial budget, so a lot of the revenue type of questions are already answered and easier to build into them. Last month, we reviewed just some basic assumptions, so all those have been built in. But it's important to point out that this is just a snapshot in time, and that this budget development process, along with our projection, is a living document over the next several months as we move towards a preliminary budget in midsummer roughly, and then the final budget adoption in October. So I just put together a really short slide deck just to kind of walk you through, again, some of the assumptions that we're using, some other data. But ultimately, the projection is falling where we have been falling for the last several years. in that $3.5 million to $4 million range of annual shortfall. So just a quick, come on. If I can get this to, not sure why this isn't moving. Okay, but obviously this year is a little different heading into, and when I say this year, I mean planning for 26, 27. With all the talks we've had about our reorganization and things like that. But my approach to this has been, I'm rolling forward who we are today, and as a lot of information is going to start coming in on the cost savings that are coming from the optimizing process, mainly staffing, with secondary school course selections and things like that. So as those numbers, or transportation, as those savings numbers come in, we'll be working off of this. And I think we'll come out to a balanced budget because of that process. But I had to start somewhere, because right now, I quite honestly, we have assumptions of what those savings might be. But I think by April or so, we'll really have a pretty good, a much better idea what those savings might be. So again, some of the key assumptions, obviously enrollment, we've spent a lot of time talking about. We'll once again assume a 2% decrease in our third Friday count in September. Open enrollment, I tightened it up a little bit because our variance, our positive position with open enrollment has slipped away the last few years, but pretty stable in terms of what the projection is. And then the voucher program participation continues to grow there, and I budget I think it was a 15% increase in that in terms of dollars. So that either can be participation or the funding per student. So those are the key enrollment numbers that we are using in this projection model. I was on DPI's website today, and again, we spend a lot of time on enrollment, but every time I get a different source of information, I think it's interesting to share that they're all showing the same trend. So what this is, and this is the third Friday, or the membership counts on all the districts in the state's revenue limit calculation. So in 2011, 2012, over 840,000 students were full membership were counted in DPI's count of the revenue limit. In 25, 26, we're down to 780,000 students, so a drop of over 60,000 students during that period of time on a statewide basis. And then here's a version of the graph I show pretty much on a regular basis. Here's Waukesha's count over the same period of time, where we were over 13,000, and we're down to 11,000 students in 25, 26 in terms of membership.
And clarification, that's both brick and mortar and eAchieve in this.
That's everything, all resident students. And it also, this number, it's the same trend, but this number also includes summer school in part of the math, but you can just see the trend is nearly identical. So I thought that was interesting for any people who may be still struggling on why we're having the conversations we've been having on a budget and facility issue. Is there's just fewer and fewer kids every year, and there's going to be into the very near future and beyond moving forward. So I thought I'd share those graphs. On the funding side, again, we know these numbers because the state budget's in place for next school year. So we did assume the $325 per pupil on the revenue limit would increase again. Again, that's, as of now, we have 398 years of that left, I think, on the veto. Per pupil aid is staying at $742 per resident student. And then, as Paul just mentioned, open enrollment funding is increasing. So for 26, 27, a regular education student, again, this is a revenue and expense number, because you have your ins and your outs with open enrollment, will be $11,030, and then special ed student would be $14,882. And talking in terms of what comes and goes with that, we get $11,700 in revenue limit authority, so we hold on to $700, and then you also get the $742. So we get to maintain, for the kid who's leaving, we get about $1,600 roughly of revenue that's maintained. Special ed, there's other funding sources that goes into that, so that one's not as clean cut to get that margin. But just keep in mind that that number is going up. We're still a positively more ins than outs when it comes to open enrollment, mainly because of eAchieve. But that gap, as we've talked in previous meeting, is narrowing. As more competition arrives on the virtual scene, and we'll continue to monitor that and have eAchieve reports because they're really, again, the driver on our solid position with open enrollment.
Mr. Webb?
Yeah, just a quick question on the open enrollment in and out numbers. So you indicate we keep roughly $1,500-$1,600
For regular ed, yep.
for any student open enrolling out, correct? For a student open enrolling in, we essentially lose an equivalent amount, right? We don't.
No, we actually gained the 11,000 because otherwise that student, if it wasn't for open enrollment, they wouldn't be coming here.
Right, but we still have to educate them, so there's a
Yes.
cost associated
Yes,
with that, right?
absolutely.
So is it safe to say that the cost of educating a student is around $12,600 for a regular student as opposed to a special ed?
I would say it's less than that when you look at open enrollment, because when we identify the seats, we're not adding sections of teachers, right? You're filling, and you might have a class that has 19 kids in it that could have 25 in it. So you've already fixed that cost in for those 19 students that are already with us. I would argue if you add 5 more open enrollment kids to that fixed cost is there. So I think you're actually making out better than a wash in the scenario that you shared.
So is it safe to say that we're net winners when kids open and roll out then?
I think there's a scenario with all the movement that happens in open enrollment that could be true.
Okay, thank you.
But on average, is that the case? I would say no.
Mrs. White?
I have a question about the projected 0 open enrollment seats for next year, the headline that was in the paper on, last week. What would that number be if we, weren't looking at option E1 being totally, imposed for next year? Because to say that we have no open seats doesn't sound very promising for marketing to other people and encouraging them to come our way.
Sure.
So I think you're referring to the conversation from Student Services
Student
with Mr.
Services.
Pat and Mrs. Voigt, sure. So for most grade levels, year over year, the number is 0. The 0 number doesn't mean we won't take open enrollment seats. It just doesn't mandate that we take open seats. So for example, if we put 5 in a grade level, it means we must take 5. And sometimes there are challenges with students that are coming from other districts that perhaps would make it difficult for us to accept them, for example. By putting 0, it allows us to have flexibility to take students, but it doesn't require us to take students. So most of our grade levels year over year are at 0, and in special education, almost exclusively over the years, we're at 0, just to give the district the flexibility that it needs. Mr. Harlan, is that what you recall as well?
Yes, that is correct.
So if there would be students that would like to come here because they heard about our STEM program and they, would like to involve, actually, was their cap raised for STEM as a potential opening up of additional seats?
We have been working with the governance board, sure. And so what the current cap is there's an elementary cap and then there's a middle school cap. And what we're doing is we're just combining those caps into a K-8 cap. So the actual number will be 840, and right now this year they have just over 600 students. So we have plenty of room to grow. And if you remember, the capacity of Horning is 925, so we have the capability over time, if we need to, we can work with the governance board to make that cap even a little bit higher. I think it'll take us some time, obviously, to get to the 840 number.
But that would indicate that anyone who would be interested in enrolling in STEM would have that opportunity, that there's seats available.
There are seats available, yes. STEM has its own process, so it's its own application process, and they also require a tour of the school because it obviously is a different type of learning environment. But ultimately, yes, there is space, and it is a program, like we talked about through the entire optimizing process, that has been growing in the school district of Waukesha. So having it at Horning gives us the opportunity to see if we can continue to have that growth and enhance it.
by saying there's 0 seats available, it's not saying that students could choose to come here for dual language then?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah, we have roughly 100 open enrollment students on a regular basis year over year. That number can grow, and by putting 0, it just, again, gives the district the flexibility that we are looking for. It doesn't mean we won't take more students, and certainly we would take students in any program where we have space.
Dr. Piasek?
Did you have something? Okay. This isn't anything new. If I look at the last 5 years of open enrollments, I'm looking at specifically 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We've had 0 projected for the last 5 years for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the reason why we're doing the Optimizing Our Future is because we have such excess capacity in our middle schools. So I think it's fair to say that the 0 number in the open enrollment projections doesn't have a lot of correlation to the capacity of the buildings and more to being able to accommodate the students that want to be here, and especially the students within the district, right?
Absolutely correct.
I've noticed that number has changed quite a bit over the last few years. In fact, it looks like the number of available seats has decreased, but I think that correlates then to the number of sections that we have available, because our capacity is increasing, but the number of available seats in open enrollment is decreasing.
Correct.
I just wanted to clarify, there was an email communication last week that along the same line, I think Mrs. Voigt had raised some concern about the open enrollment numbers, but there was reference to our inability to take national students across the nation for open enrollment. To my knowledge, there's no national open enrollment program that would bring funding into the district. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there something that
no,
you were
I
referring
was
to?
referring to when he had mentioned that he had gone to the national conference and talking about our successes in Waukesha. If someone would want to relocate here, like some people have said, that from Texas, from Atlanta, from other places, because they think our dual language program is really impressive. You know, that's what I'm referring to national.
So if someone moved into the district, we would be able to provide a seat for them, correct?
Oh, absolutely. We're required to.
Yeah.
Yes.
As a resident.
Seems like it. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Expenditure assumptions, as you know, any unionized group we have is tied to CPI, and I put this on here because it's something I hadn't thought about, but the anticipated CPI increases between 2.6 and 2.8%, but because of the federal shutdown, there's 1 month of CPI data that apparently isn't available because I guess it was the November report for the October CPI. So even though you can kind of look at historical or the trends, but so we were talking as business officials in Waukesha County, and we started talking about, well, what are these numbers? So if you simply remove October and only use 11 months of data and divide it by 12 months, like they historically have done, we'd be at 2.63. But if you use September's data and inserted that to be October's data, we'd be at 2.71. And then the same case if you use November. But it was a question you just never thought or a situation you never thought twice about. So I'm pretty confident in saying that somewhere between 2.6 and 2.8% will be CPI. And what we've done in the past, obviously with the teaching unit, there's a direct tie to their settlements and pay adjustments, but then we also kind of mirror or shadow the other groups, not always, but oftentimes. So I would say that between 2.6 and 2.8% is the range that not only will be seen, but what I've built into the long-range model. Obviously, health insurance is a big line item, and what we've done in the past here, as I mentioned last month, is we assume a 5% increase in premiums. That's just to get an assumption and a forecast out there. If it comes in higher than that, we automatically go into a mode of making the necessary plan adjustments or premium copay adjustments to get to 5%, but it doesn't mean that health insurance comes off the table at 5%. It just means that you need a number to put into a model. When we've talked about this, and actually we'll be talking about it over the next 3 months to see how this all comes together. Dental insurance, we don't think there'll be an increase. Claims have been pretty positive, so our surplus there, we think we can get by, and generally there's not a big, dental's nowhere near the dollar amount, obviously. Busing, we have contractual rate increases. This is one of those pieces of information that in, a few weeks we'll have a lot more once the choice and school selections and everything are put into place. We'll have a lot more information. So for now, I'm assuming the same number of routes, but just at the rates that were approved in the master agreement with per student. Any questions on?
Mrs. Voigt?
You're assuming the same number of routes even with the consolidation in place? And you don't think that more kids are going to have to be bused if they're not able to go to the neighborhood school, like and walk there?
I'm not 100% convinced we'll need to, because I think there's efficiencies that's going to be had as well. But that's why we're doing this, 10 months before we'll actually approve the final budget, so we'll have time to adjust. As I said earlier, this is a living document. If I would have said, I think there's going to be 10 increases, I think it would have been fair for any committee member to say, well, why do you think it's 10, Darren? And I would have said, I don't know, easy math. I mean, there's just no way of knowing. So in situations like this, I tend to go with a known number, unless there's something so obvious that it needs to be adjusted. But I don't think we've seen administratively that there's going to be a major swing in the busing, so I just left it at current routes.
And I want to be clear, and this is kind of a similar point to Dr. Piazza, because at this point in the budget, in the normal course of the enrollment cycle that we're in right now, this is normal. Because we've never had the same numbers until you get all the way through figuring out where they are, regardless of other plans that we are going through. So I think as a placeholder, just to understand where our costs are, I think it's a fair assumption to keep it flat. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the parental choice program assumption. So you had indicated a 15% growth either in participation or in cost. Did I understand you?
Yeah, the dollar amount that would be charged for that program would go up 15%, and that 15% could be generated by either more kids participating in it or the increase in funding per student. It'll be a combination of the two. So as I look at it budget-wise, I just think dollars.
Right.
Because I don't know, but you'd have to think that the rate it's going and the trend line is there is going to be more students, and we know there's going to be allocation per student increase.
Do we have any historical data on students and cost changes over, I don't know, the same period that we've been looking at from well, at least since it went into effect, right?
Yeah, it's in the revenue limits every year, so we can pull that. Actually, I think we've shared it, I don't know how many months ago it was now, but we've shared that in the past, and it's been steadily growing. My thought on these types of programs, just like open enrollment, is that sometimes at some point they kind of mature out and you don't have those big jumps. With this one, I'm not sure if we're there yet because of the steady growth there's been in it. But yeah, I could share that data again next month or put it in the Friday update if you'd like.
That would be great. If it's available and
No,
I'm
it is. Yep.
not finding it, you can refer me back to where I can find it too.
Again, we'll talk about this in a little more detail in a few minutes. Obviously, we're assuming that the board's going to authorize the call of the outstanding debt next month, and that our debt will be paid off on April 1st of '26. What does that mean to the overall budget process is that, beginning next year, we will have no debt service levy whatsoever. And for the foreseeable future, there's no other notes to be or bonds to be paid off. So I think that's worth noting, and it certainly helps the tax levy conversation. So here's the summary sheet that goes into the model, and there's quite a bit of information in here. There's a couple years of historical data. You can see the September membership count and the decreases we've seen, and that were projected on the top line. In 24-25, the September membership was 10,617. After 2 years of, 1 year of actuals and then 1 year of projection, we'll be down to 10,188. And again, that's just the September count. So if you look at the chart I showed before, that included summer school and all the other things that go into your 3-year average. The next line, you can see the $325 increase in per student funding, or revenue limit authority. And then there's the per pupil aid. Again, that number has not changed the last few biennial budget cycles, so I don't know why it would start changing in the future. There's certainly no reason to anticipate that. And then total revenues and expenditures, again, using the assumptions, the major assumptions that we just went through. You generate both of those numbers, and then you can see the projection in red. So looking at 26, 27, the current year we had a deficit, but we always do because of things like site-based management and things like that, that schools don't spend all their budgets. We roll it into fund balance, and then they have the authority to spend their carryover. That generates, so it's really a balanced budget in my mind, but when I go to project, I take that out, I net that out. So looking at 26, 27, we're looking at just under a $3.9 million budget deficit. I don't know how many years in a row, it's been several, we've been around that $3.5, $4 million number, and I see that continuing. The number is going further to the right in red. Now, this is assuming we don't do anything to correct our budget, right? So the budget deficit builds on itself, and you can see it just pretty much doubles from 3.8 or 3.9 to 7.6, and then that trend just continues. But obviously, what I think keeps us from, some people ask, is this a crisis? I think this conversation is what stops us from being in a crisis. We're identifying it and responding. This is early in the budget process. We have several months to go before like teachers' contracts and things like that, where you really start locking in your costs. So I think this is not a number that we're surprised to see. I think between Jim and I and the rest of the cabinet during our conversations this year, we probably referenced $3.5 to $4 million dozens of times. And then as you work further down, I don't get into, in the budget model at this point, trying to estimate what equalization aid is going to be. So what I do is I try to get it as close to like a flat equalization aid amount going out into the future, because as we've seen in the last few years, that number can move on us with us having no real say on it. But there is, but I want to share some, but I think the levy will end up being somewhat stable. Part of that is, I think, hopefully on average, aid kind of loses some of its fluidity, but also we're having fewer and fewer kids, so our revenue and tax authority is also declining. So again, we're at a tax rate, and I know that's not, I agree with, in the theory that that's not the best way to measure taxation, but it's one that's referenced a lot, around that $5 down to a $4 tax rate. And then down a little further, you can see the referendum debt levy. And you can see it dropping off next year. This year it was 2.28 million, going down to zero. So that's the projection that we'll start working on administratively. I think, again, it's not a number we're surprised to see at the 3.8 or 9 million. And then we'll update the board. Certainly I would think in April or so, when staffing starts really falling into place, we can come back. We're already going through the process of identifying like site costs that are specific, custodial costs, copier leases, any other service type contracts that are site specific to a facility. All those non-personnel type cost efficiencies, we're collecting that data now. But this is where I see us being for the 26-27 school year.
Mr. Harlan?
Just to confirm, the current model scenario, this would be what we had heard of the cost of doing nothing for the next 5 years. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Yep.
So not only would we be 20 million behind, we'd also have exhausted our entire fund balance, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that goes away pretty rapidly.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we would move into the next discussion item tonight, which is the Fund 39 debt payment.
So let me get back to docs here. Yeah, as we've talked about this a lot, but it's finally coming due. So I'd hoped to get a sample of the resolution, but bond counsel didn't get that to me today, but it's a pretty short document that will be coming to finance next month for you to approve, that will authorize us to do, enter into the call date and have that final payment be on April 1st. Attached in the, in docs is the latest cost analysis. Again, these numbers aren't to the penny because a lot of this is based off interest earnings that's yet to come, so there's going to be some margin for error, but this is really close to where we see this coming out. So on the left-hand side, on the top, this is what our amortization schedule looks like if we don't call the bonds, and then using reserves, and we did levy for this year, as I mentioned before, a couple $1 million. You can see on the right side, this is what the actual payoff will be. So you can see in fiscal year 26, 27, 27, 28, 28, 29, there's no debt payment left. By taking this action, we're also saving the taxpayers $503,000 in interest expense, which would be the interest payments in those last 3 years, plus the interest payment, that $302,000 that's listed on the left-hand side for interest expense. There's two payments there. One's the spring payment and one's the December payment. So we're saving the December payment. We'll still make the normal interest payment on April 1st. So a net saving of over $500,000 in interest that, you know, we'll never have to ask the taxpayers to. And this is a direct taxpayers levy savings. There's no aid factors. There's no anything else like that. So on, like I said, next month we'll have the committee, and then the board will ask for the approval of the resolution. We have to do it so many days in advance so investors can be notified that the call's being made and things like that. So we have to hit those timelines. We do work with bond counsel on this. It's not a very expensive process. We're budgeting $2,000 for those services for them to do all the necessary paperwork, et cetera. But after many years of talking about this, we anticipate being debt-free April 1st.
Mr. Wad?
Thank you. So, Mr. Clark, could you just sort of review the history of this particular referendum from perspective of how much was borrowed, what the original terms were supposed to be, how much sooner we're managing to pay it off, and confirm my assumption that the reason we're paying it off early is because we were able to accelerate payments. We're in a position to be able to accelerate our principal payments. Do we know what the total interest is that we've managed to save the taxpayers?
Yeah, I'll have that. Once we get the final numbers, I was planning on maybe either coming back to committee if the chair would prefer that, or do it in the Friday update. We can calculate. I have the original, once the debt was issued, because to me there's three benchmarks. There's the one where we did our public information on the referendum on, and then there's the one where all the debt had been issued, so you know what your interest rates you locked in on, and then there's this final calculation of what interest you actually paid. So I was going to kind of combine those into some sort of report or a Friday update, because I think it's worth saving. In terms of the approach, the board at the time, because I can't remember, about a year out, we all kind of agreed that we thought we could pay this down faster. So right away, the 20-year bond issue was off the table, and the vast majority of school districts that go to referendum for $60 million or whatever they're asking for these days, it's always a 20-year bond issue because the tax impact's just too great to go in a shorter term. But the board at that time said, let's do 10-year. So that was our base amortization schedule that we started talking about and costing out. But then as it got going, I recommended, or maybe my finance chair at the time, we got talking about, let's issue $45 million in bonds and $15 million as a bank loan. You're going to pay more on the bank loan in terms of interest, but you'd have the flexibility to spend it down or pay it off sooner. So that was the original approach, and I'd have to go back, but we paid off that loan several years in advance. So that left the $45 million. Now, some of the interests you'll see when I bring back all that data, interest rates also did go down during that time too, so it wasn't all fiscal management miracles or anything like that. But this one, it was a 10-year note, and we're paying it off in 7. And we were able to do that because we also installed that call date, because again, our goal was to pay it off as fast as we thought we could. And then we were able to defease or set aside dollars that are going towards this payoff now. So it was a combination of all those things, but the overarching goal of all of that was interest savings and paying it off as fast as you could.
And just to clarify for everyone, when we defease and we put that money into savings, we were actually, I think, getting a higher interest rate return on the defeased money than the interest rate that,
Certainly in the last few years.
yeah.
Yep.
So that was a net benefit to the district as well financially, right?
Yep.
Mrs. White?
Would there be any advantage to continue having debt in terms of the levying process instead of paying it off sooner?
In terms of defeasing or,
Rather than spending this $8 million now to try to pay it off quickly, to have that money, like have it in a loan kind of situation to help us cover the shortages that might be coming.
I would say because of the interest savings you get by calling the debt, that offsets and surpasses any financial benefit to just sitting on the dollars and making the payments as they come. But that's my opinion.
Well, and obviously, I was part of the decision-making process to try to accelerate it as much as we can. And I think it's dramatic, the savings that have been generated. Because it was really, to be, 10 was already half of what normally is used for the debt repayment plan. And we decided to cut that down even more, which is, I just think, great stewardship in terms of trying to save as much money as we possibly could in the process.
Mrs. White?
I do have another question. When you had shared in the packet on considerations with optimizing, there was a SDW school site projects, 2017 through 2025 list. That was there, a sheet that I had not seen any other place besides in that publication. And it lists the total referendum dollars at $66,354,225. And I've always thought of it as 60 million.
Yeah, I think it also bakes in the interest that was earned, because we didn't spend all
Okay.
the money instantly, right?
Right.
We invested it and got some interest returns on idle funds, because obviously we couldn't, especially when COVID hit and everything, the whole construction schedule got changed, if you recall.
Okay.
So that factors in the interest we made on the money while it sat idle. That's why the number's so unique. It's not a nice round number.
Okay, so that was really the interests, the earned potential.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. I usually refer to it as a $60 million referendum, and it's like, but we spent 66.
The bond issuance, or we ended up doing a bank loan too, was 60 million.
Okay. Thank you. As I mentioned, this sheet, I think it'd be really worthwhile for the community to see the investments that we were able to make because of the referendum. Like I said, I was surprised that it was 66 million instead of 60 million. But then with the additional funds that have been added through 2025, it's really 91 million is the total listed on this particular document.
Yeah, and there was food service dollars, there was several pieces in that, if I remember the document correctly, that got us to that total. But yeah, we've done great work with our facilities the last 7-8 years or whatever it's been.
But would it be possible to have this in an electronic form? Like you said, the
Yeah.
only time I ever saw it was in the white binder that we got this summer. And I, had written all over it right away at the time, and it's like, so it's not a very clean document per se, with my scribble notes all over it, et cetera. But I think that it's really something that we can be very proud of, to share with the community that we have invested $91 million in our schools since 2017. And have some really great results in the process.
And those are just the larger projects. Obviously, there's things that don't make a board report or, smaller projects that we're doing as well. So, no, we've made huge strides.
I'd be very proud of that.
Dr. Piasek?
We just need to be clear that there are a lot of different sources of those funds. I can appreciate the desire to promote that, but understand that that's a combination of referendum funds, ESSER funds, fund balance, and prioritization of resources. So when we say we've made that investment, I think we just need to be really clear about the source of those dollars.
And it does
Most of them
have a footnote to
not
it,
being
right?
recurring, right?
Yeah, the vast majority. Yep. Vast majority, actually.
Also, there's nothing private about that document that's
No.
been made available to the board.
I want to
There's no
say, it was in
reason.
the optimizing three-ring binder that was shared.
Right.
And I want to say it was in some F and F, but I spent a little while after I read your email trying to find it. I swear it was in an F and F report at some point, but I could be wrong on that. But
was.
yeah, it's public record, yeah.
Yeah, we've looked at that before.
But especially now as we're paying it off, I think for the community to realize what their tax dollars were invested in. And that, the extra 6 million because of the interest earnings was a real eye-opener for me, I'm real positive.
But what we are paying off is the 2018
Right.
referendum, not the total amount of investments that you're talking about.
No.
I just think we need to be clear that this is referring to the 2018 referendum and
Right.
not the full list of facility investments that you're referring to on that list.
Like I said, I'm looking at the column for total 2018 referendum, which is 66 million. I was just impressed to see that, and I just wanted a clarification of that, because, again, I always thought of it as this is the loan, this is the bonds, and 60 million, then to see 66 being able to be invested in the referendum improvements is really impressive.
When I think, kudos to the board in 22, 23, who decided to start accelerating that payment, because that was a big decision. We were seeing some upside from the way that the state equation was working in our favor, and so I think that was the right decision at the time.
Okay. Moving then into our next discussion item for this evening is the monthly budget report.
Yeah, attached is the usual reporting, and the Excel spreadsheet, I believe, was sent out, if I did it correctly. So just a couple of things in terms of the budget that I think are noteworthy in terms of identifying how we're doing this fiscal year. Once you get into December, you've got enough payroll data and things like that where you can really start projecting, because if you think about it, July, August, and even into September, you don't have much data to really project out how you think your fiscal year is going to come to a close. So I've been working on updating the salary and benefits projections the last few weeks, and it looks like we're going to come in a good position in terms of those line items. Now, obviously, we're a service industry, and salaries and benefits makes up about 80 to 85% of our budget. So if you're good there, your chances of being good at year end overall are certainly solid. And then the other thing that's unique to school finance in January is when we get our first property tax revenue. So we really don't get significant revenue until we're 6 months into our fiscal year. And in years past, we would borrow, I remember, way back, borrowing $25 million a year for cash flow purposes only. And that hasn't been the case for, I don't think we haven't borrowed in my 10 years here. But we've built up fund balance over time, and people talk about, well, why do you have this fund balance? And a large part of it, or the main part in my mind, is so you can avoid those interest charges of having to borrow cash for cash flow purposes. So keep in mind, like we've been, September, October, November, December, we've been paying all of our staff, and we finally get this influx of revenue in the middle of January. So, and we're not, at this point, we still think we're solid cash flow. That's why we're not here asking for you to do a short-term, or it used to be try and borrow, short-term borrow. And we're not asking for a line of credit or any of those things. We haven't had any of that in place in years because we're so solid financially with our fund balance. So a big month in January, I mean, and then after that, you get intermediate tax revenue and your age starts coming in a little more solid, and we're fine cash flow wise until the end of June.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify something. So, going back to something Mr. Harlan referenced earlier when we were looking at our budget projections going forward, the more we deplete our fund balance, the more we may put future boards in a position of having to do that kind of borrowing, which would be which would add additional cost. Can you give me an idea of what that number is in the fund balance, that if we go below, we may not have enough to carry the cash flow numbers forward without having to do that kind of borrowing?
Yeah, the range, I would say, if we get, I mean, I always see 20% as kind of the bottom, but you probably could go slightly lower than that. And the problem I have with that, because I have the same concern, is if you start using fund balance, whatever you're spending it on, sometimes administration or boards wants to keep those things going, and all of a sudden that use of fund balance becomes part of the flow. Because I've certainly seen that not here, but in previous districts. But yeah, I would say around 20% is kind of the number that you don't want to go lower than that. And I think we've been pretty good in managing fund balance when it has gotten higher. If you remember, part of the what we started calling phase 3 of the capital improvement projects we did, which was a lot of the work at the high schools, in particular South, and then upgrading the 3 high school auditoriums. You know, as you build that up, I think you can identify one-time costs to utilize fund balance very effectively. And I think we've done a really good job with that, but 20% is the number that I have in my head.
So if I go back and look at the projections here, it looks to me like we would be flirting with that by the 27-28 school year if we don't act on the timeline that we've already laid out.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this projection, when you look at it, hopefully you can see why the administration brought to the board, we need to start looking at facilities, because otherwise we're ramping up to take nearly $4 million of services out of our existing facilities like we have. So that's why, you know, in looking at our previous projections, and Jim and I have talked, like I said, we've talked a lot about the $3.5 to $4 million. You get to the point where you have to look at not impacting the services being provided to students and looking at other cost-saving areas, and that's why we came to you with the optimizing suggestion.
Mrs. Voigt?
Actually, the concept of the downsizing has been in effect for 15 years. You know, I think we've done a really good job of, you know, working with that timeline to be able to have minimizing our footprint is one of the things that's been like an ongoing kind of a situation. Those monies, when you sell the building, how are they handled in terms of the budget situation? You know, is it, when you sell a building, does that help to offset your
No.
deficit?
Sorry.
It can help in that regard. The problem with the sale of buildings is you don't know when it's going to happen. You can't build a
Right.
budget around it, right?
Right.
And I think what's different, because I would agree with you, Waukesha they've done more with buildings back when no other districts were really talking about it. But I think what's different now is enrollment has dropped so far that we needed a bigger push than doing 1 or 2 schools. I don't think, you know, I think, what have we done, 3 buildings? To do it one at a time and all those, and I think we talked about that when we first presented the optimizing idea. This was gonna be a wall-to-wall, we're talking attendance areas and all of that. We just needed to reorganize ourselves because the demand for action was so much bigger than it had been. And, you know, my kids were at Pleasant Hill in '09 or whenever it was.
2010,
Yeah.
2009,
Yep.
2010.
I certainly know that process, but at some point when you've got over 4,000 seats empty, there's a call to action, I think.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't let this go without addressing it. To have the previous speaker talk about the benefits of having had a plan to reduce our footprint, knowing that she voted against the Blair closure, the only board member that did so, and also stood at that podium and fought against the merger of Hatfield and Whittier, is rich. The fact of the matter is, if we had followed that path that she claims to somehow have supported but didn't, we would be in a much worse position relative to our structural deficit today.
I think I want to just highlight too that, there's been a lot of discussions about the sale of buildings and trying to schedule that. And Mr. Clark, to your point, these are educational buildings which are hard to sell, right? I mean, so Blair sat here for 4 years, unsaleable, no interest, interesting in the prime location that it is. But understanding too that these are not going to be $20 million sales. These are going to be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, depending, right, on where these go. Move that into the general fund to support the operations of the business. Again, it's a one-time benefit that is very shortly lived. This is not the resolve or the answer that is going to fix the problems. The problems need to be, you need to shrink the cost and the footprint of the structure, which is what we're doing. And I know that there's, the angst with this process and talking about, well, why would you just, sell the building and then plan? Again, you can't structure it. It's very hard to figure out who your potential buyers are going to be and what they want to do and how we do that. But even the short-term benefit really doesn't get us much benefit of it. And I think we need to be real about what that does and how we manage it going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the contracts we've looked at over the years, or proposals to purchase this, that, or the other thing, I mean, you have due diligence periods that can go a year. That developers would need to get their city approvals and all that, so it's just not viable to factor that in, at least not instantly, that instant gratification that people might want, or that flexibility it might provide. It's just not sound to factor that in my opinion.
Mrs. White?
Again, as far as budget building, I can totally understand that. But I think I'm very impressed with that plan since 2010 to take advantage of the buildings that were hard to sell, like Saratoga, and to be able to give it a second life and get the STEM program started. That's amazing to be thinking about that, to lease the Richardson, school, the opportunity to lease at Pleasant Hill. Again, not having them stand vacant, because I think that's really, really smart all along. And even over at White Rock, to bring in, first we tried the 3K, 4K kind of, kids over there, and then we, brought in the 18 to 21 and the alternative high school kinds of things. Like, again, using that building and instead of letting it stand empty, I think has been really, really very wise use of those facilities over the years. Rebuilding this place, redoing Blair.
I just want to, Mrs. White, correct that we're talking about our monthly budget report.
I know, but I think we've been very good stewards of doing those sorts of things until we can sell them potentially to be able to, still service the kids in the process. And I'm very proud of the previous boards and the things we've done in the last 15-year optimization plan, if you want to call it that, in terms of downsizing our footprint dramatically.
I didn't realize we had a prior 15-year plan, but thank you for that. Mr. Clark, can you just confirm for me and just in the monthly, what falls under the expenses for non-capital objects?
It's things that, well, it used to be technology, but technology's gotten so cheap that it's not the case. But I would, the threshold for our depreciation, we just changed, it used to be $5,000. So it's smaller types of equipment that costs around $1,000 or less. It's not supplies, it's not a consumable, but it's not, a $20,000 piece of equipment either. So it's smaller, shorter lifespan type of objects.
Okay. All right, not seeing any other comments. We would be moving into other business for recommendations for future committee meetings. Mrs. White.
I would like to propose the idea of the CEP discussion that was recommended to me by one of our social workers. The concept is that students are able to get free meals, breakfast and lunch, if there is a high level of free and reduced lunch students in different buildings. And I'm aware of what's happening over at Hadfield since I work there with the Blessings in a Backpack program. And the social worker was suggesting that we look at CEP again as an option.
I think it would, may I? Yes, it would be appropriate to ask that district employee to reach out to the administration about that.
Well, she had asked me to bring it up. So
Well, there
that's-
is a chain of command in the district. Could they just reach out to administration to talk about that? Would that be appropriate? I mean, I guess the reason I say that, and this is germane to this, I think all board members are welcome to suggest agenda items, but that control rests with the chair, and this has been brought up before, and we've talked about why. So if there's a specific school that has a request, they could work that through the administration.
So that's what you're recommending to do?
I think that would be appropriate before it comes to the board.
Agreed, and it's the same feedback that's been shared in the past on this exact topic.
I was never suggested that we could do it, as this individual school kind of propose it rather than bring you.
Well, I'm not saying that it's even, I don't know what it is, but I don't think it would make sense to agendize it. I don't want
So it's
to, I don't want
municipal
to
and-
take the role of the chair. You can make the decision that you think is appropriate. I just know that we've had this request in the past. and-
Agreed, and we've moved on. So yes, to Dr. Piasek's point, I think it's fair, just like everything else, and we've said in the past, for them to reach out and deal directly with administration on starting those pieces. For tonight, we do have a need to go into executive session. If someone would like to motion us in, Mr. Harland?
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Second?
Okay, motion by Mr. Harland, second by Dr. Piasek. Tanya, can you take the roll?
Mr. Wild?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
Mrs. Kozowski?
Aye.
Mr. Harlan?
Aye.
Dr. Piasek?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. I do not believe we have a need to come back into open session tonight, so that will conclude our meeting for this evening. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next month.